kick us off. Need your permission. Thank you very much. And once again, welcome Jenny to a little bit convening. To formally introduce Jenny, Jenny is one of the co-founders of a women's empowerment network, coalition network. Jenny has collaborated on and co-led international development initiatives and community volunteer trips abroad since 2012, over a decade now, primarily focused in Southeast Asia and Latin America. With a master's in international development, she has a ton of experience with nonprofit administration, strategy, volunteer recruitment, fundraising, grant writing, partner development, project management, coordinating community-based projects, and facilitating student experiences during education abroad programs. That is just a small bit of the more official kind of bio of Jenny, having known her for a few years now. There's a ton of other wonderful projects that Jenny has been involved with. And WICO, which we're going to talk a little bit more and learn about today, is a project that Jenny has been leading for a few years now with her co-founder, Rebecca. And I've personally had the chance of actually working with WICO and with Jenny in implementing a lot of their gender equity projects, especially in Costa Rica. And so having seen the work closely and the impact of providing access and mentorship and support to different communities and gender equity projects around the world, I think a lot of us in this room will find a lot of what WICO is doing quite inspiring and quite insightful as well. So with that, I'm really honored to have Jenny with us. Thank you once again for making this space and the time, Jenny. And we're going to kick off with a few questions. So Gail, I'm going to pass it on to you for the question. The questions we're going to ask are based on this article that I've shared. I'm going to put the link here in case someone hasn't had the chance to browse it, so you can also take a look at it while we have the conversation. Gail, passing it to you.
Yes, hi. Oh, it's so good to see everyone. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. And I just love these convenings because there's just always so rich and dynamic, and I always learn a lot. So thank you for this conversation. And I think that Women's Empowerment Coalition is doing awesome work. I have to add to the bio that you're a great writer. I really enjoyed reading your article. It was accessible. It was straightforward. It didn't have a lot of, I want to say fancy words, but I got a lot of fancy ideas from it.
That's the goal. Thank you.
And I just wanted to start off because it was something that I'm drawn to in the article is the word feminist and feminist movement and feminist coalition. And perhaps I bring a bias to it because of my generation and my resources as a woman growing up in the US. And I'm just curious if you could let us know as a group here how you define a feminist movement, or how WICO defines a feminist coalition, because I do think that in some countries, in some communities, it's a word that carries a lot of denotation and connotation. So tell us a bit more about your thinking on that term.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here and meet you all. I'm excited to dig in here. So yeah, that's a great first question. I know feminist as a word can also often be like a very Western idea and kind of hard for people outside of the US or even Western countries to really connect with. So we're pretty conscious with that. That's why we try and focus a lot on our conversations with partners and our partner development on gender equity. But for the sake of brevity, I'll just define what I consider a feminist movement globally to be women or girls led, women or girls focused, and has a built-in amplifier effect. So it doesn't have to be all women or all girls doing programs or projects for all women or all girls. However, I think the kind of leadership or the guidance should be primarily women or girls led, with a common kind of purpose for progressing the rights for women and girls in whatever country or whatever context we're speaking about. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. I think having examples of a working definition for some people here that they can use or borrow or adapt when they're talking to their community members, maybe explaining their goals and their mission to politicians, right, or others in the community who might bring a bias around the word, but if they're explaining it in the centeredness of it, I think that that's very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll just add to that too. I mean, I think if you are having these kinds of conversations, I've had them so many times that there are kind of like, I won't say easy fallbacks, but perhaps some points that can point to, I mean, having research is always going to be helpful, but there is a lot of research out there that when you support women, I mean, they're building communities, they're building families, their children are going and getting education and healthcare. So there's just a lot of research around that you can talk to support these points, that kind of like by proxy is showing how these movements are important, right? So I think sometimes the indirect routes are often, ironically, the most direct routes to achieving what you want out of a conversation. So again, I have a list of resources. I'll send those to Abby after this conversation so folks can see more. But yeah.
Thank you.
And that might, I'm just gonna like piggyback on that question to ask just a context question around the work that WECO does, and this might be a good place for us to introduce folks to the model that you do. But I'm curious about some of the conversations that you have because you work in different parts of the world in many different continents at this point, and the understanding of that word is perhaps quite different in different contexts. And I just have some conversations I've had in Latin America where people have heard the word feminism and have pushed back a little bit, especially if you're working in a rural context, for example. And so, with that, I guess my question is, what kind of conversations have you had with WECO's partners? And talk a little bit more about how you build those partnerships, because you have a very unique approach of how you work in communities. WECO doesn't exist in a lot of the countries where you do run programs. You work through partnerships. So talk to us about your model of working in providing economic development support in countries around the world.
Happy to. Yeah. So we always work through intermediate organizations that are based in country. So we look for partners who are embedded in their communities, who know their communities, who know the work, who are doing the work day in, day out. And then we come and we see how we can collaborate and co-create a project that's specifically designed to either amplify their existing projects for women and girls or to create a new one. So just as an example of like how we would approach those conversations, we kind of do our research ahead of time. We do some initial like conversations just to get to know the organization and understand what they're doing. And then when we're talking more like, I guess, tangibly about what kind of project we can work on, we do want to make sure we're focusing on women and girls, but this doesn't mean that, to your point about like working with rural communities, this doesn't mean we want to have, an element of evangelizing feminism. I mean, this is obviously something that my co-founder and I feel very strongly for, but we also recognize that there are different entry points to doing this work. And it's very important to understand that equity comes in all shapes and forms, and there are cultural sensitivity, there's cultural awareness around like how we can engage with communities and how we can engage with people, and we defer to our partners. That's why we have partnerships, because we are not cultural experts. I mean, we've learned a lot for sure on our journey, but we rely on these partnerships to help give us that kind of cultural context that is so necessary to doing this work in a truly equitable way. So we really do rely a lot on our partners for guidance for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for providing that context. Really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask the next question, and then we'll eventually open it up to the group. I'm happy to see other smiling faces here of our little big fun believers. So kind of going along in this vein of collaboration and definitions of work and definitions of community, if let's say, for example, there are a number of little big believers who are working in the same sector, or they have the same mission, like say, for example, to increase or improve maternal health in their community.
Right.
And I have had the experience of meeting many, many amazing people, men and women, who want to further that mission and reach that goal. And how do we talk to them, or how would you talk to them about collaboration, about coming together to make their own coalition, for example, and then being a partner?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question because it has a lot of nuance to it, I think, and a lot of like different layers. So I'm going to start with just kind of like, I think when you have people and groups who are working towards a common goal in country that are perhaps under-resourced, I think honestly, the first and biggest step is just getting them together in some kind of convening point. So that can be like, bringing groups of women founders of one organization to meet with and discuss, other organization and community-based leaders. But I really think part of it is just getting them in the same room. It doesn't have to actually be a room, but just getting them together, so that they can share their knowledge. Because I think something I've learned is I need to learn when I can step in and provide guidance and when that's necessary and appropriate and when it's necessary to step back. So I think that's really important. It sounds like in this kind of hypothetical, I mean, these are people working in organizations doing work in the same vein, and a lot of magic I think can happen when you bring people together to share ideas, to share experiences, to share challenges, to share resources, all of it. So I think, recognizing that a lot of these organizations are probably small and, again, under-resourced and probably short on time as well because they're busy doing their important work. I think as an intermediate organization, it would be good for something like a third party to create that kind of space and to create the kind of like means for those community-based leaders to meet and to discuss and to have this kind of like convening. I think as like an extra layer to that, if we're looking at this as like from a development lens, I think this is what I would hope like development organizations would look more at funding stuff like this, because a lot of, I think, development in the Western side is like very siloed and like, here's, our programs, we come and work here, like you're invited to listen about our work and see where you plug in, but there's not a lot of like development organizations just providing space for that kind of conversation to exist in areas that, I mean, have people doing this work and have been doing this work for years. So, I mean, I think, yeah, that's just like a no-brainer to me. So create the space, create the means, and then as a like third layer to that, I mean, fund it, like fund these ideas that come out of that kind of magical space of people coming together and just figuring out how they can collaborate with their community work. Yeah.
Great. Very encouraging. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
for sure. Thank you so much. Oh, I think I'm hearing some background noise there. Okay. In that vein, and this is our promised last question on partnership, because I know this is, we're very curious on partnerships and we talk a lot about coalitions as part of Little Big Fun, actually, because collaboration is such a key piece to doing the work that we're all doing. And I think it's oftentimes necessary for us to come together and kind of support each other in that growth process as well. What you've mentioned and some of the advice that you've shared has been quite helpful along like partnerships and building those coalitions. I want to talk a little bit about partnerships when it comes to funding and getting funding and putting yourself in, the unique shoe that you have, which is being a funder and then also a fundee. And
Yeah.
with WICO, you're constantly kind of going between the two groups. And so I was curious if we could switch for a minute towards the fundee side of things, and
Yeah.
for you to maybe share some examples of a successful fundraising campaign or two that you recently ran at WICO. What are some key strategies that help you recruit, specific donors / funders on board, and just kind of opening up ideas for people to think about in terms of successfully raising money for such a coalition?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very important to consider. I'm going to take this two ways. So we kind of have two main channels of fundraising. One is more crowdfunding. So using platforms online to kind of engage like a lot of different individual donors who can give, typically anything from like $10 to like maybe 50, so these are like kind of more just normal people that, my friends, my family, those kinds of, so I'll speak to that for a moment and then I'll move into more of like maybe some higher amounts and how we've approached getting some higher, more major donors. Crowdfunding platforms, I have a couple of key ones that have small percentage. So they take every crowdfunding platform that we've used takes a percentage of what your total amount that you fundraise. These are anywhere from like 4% to 8%, which can get really high if you're raising a lot of money. It's pretty bad. One of the ones that we've used, I think, does 3%. And they have a really nice like interactive way where you can upload videos, you can have like different kind of ways of sharing. So it's really helpful, I think, if you're raising funds globally, because it's just easier to reach. It has a lot of options, and it again has the lowest fee. Facebook, I think, is a pretty good one, regardless of how I feel towards, Meta and that whole conversation. I think they do provide for nonprofits a way of raising money. So if you have the means to use Facebook, I absolutely would. They do not take a percentage. So everything that you raise goes towards your fundraiser, which is pretty incredible. So, and just a quick note on like marketing. I'm not sure if this is helpful. So I'll just say a couple of words, and if someone wants to follow up with me later, we can discuss that. But part of, I think, the fundraising for crowdfunding for us has been deciding how to phrase our story. So it's like really important storytelling, how to have like a concise invitation for different kinds of people at different kinds of points in their day. You really have to kind of consider the audience that you're targeting. Is this going to be a quick scroll? Is this going to be like, you don't want a paragraph, you want to have some keywords, you want to excite people. So I think just kind of thinking to those things for the crowdfunding is pretty important. And we've raised probably about half of our money that way. So we're very grassroots. We don't want to rely on major funders, because I've, personally fear that means that our projects will get kind of co-opted. And so we really want to keep to the grassroots feel of what we do, so we know that we can fund our partners doing the work that they do best. So that's the crowdfunding portion of that. To the larger kind of major donors, I am privileged to live in the United States, and there are people that I can meet and I have met through LinkedIn, through my grad program, through a lot of different networking events. It has been a long journey, but I have been able to build a kind of board and a kind of advisory board where I can have meetings and just kind of converse about our projects, get them excited. I mean, again, these conversations are all very targeted about the person that you're meeting with, right? So in terms of our board, it's like, these are typically retired, some are still working, but these are professionals who are, looking for ways to give back. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give here is just reach out to people. I mean, it takes a long time to build this kind of like support network, but really try, because ultimately that's where we've gone when we just had a fundraiser, and one of our board members did a matching grant. So we raised, X amount, and he matched everything for that. So this is how you can really kind of carry your fundraising to the next step. So I'm going to pause there and just see where their follow-up questions are. I'm happy to connect on some of this after, but I don't want to take up too much time.
I think Monal has a follow-up right away, so we'll just pass it to him.
I do have a couple of questions, but I actually wanted to go back on the question before this about partners, and just wanted to know quickly how we can become a partner, because I saw the regions that you work in, and Nepal is not in the list, but for example, if I were interested to reach out, how would that work out?
We can connect after this, and I can kind of give you a fuller breakdown, but it's basically, I mean, we're very small, so we're a volunteer-based organization. So it's my co-founder and we do research trips. So basically we would do a research trip to Nepal, and we would meet with you and we would talk with you beforehand, and then we would just discuss what kind of project would be a good fit, aligned with your organization, aligned with ours. So and it just kind of grows from there. We have like a formal agreement that we sign, just mostly for IRS purposes. Like the funds will go towards this project that we're agreeing on, and then we just get to work. So that's kind of the basis of that. But we can connect offline if you'd like to chat more about that. But yeah, it's I will say we're not looking at doing a research trip this year, just because it's been It's been busy. We actually did 2 site visits to some of our previously established projects. So it took us kind of a couple years to get back on our feet. So we're just wrapping up that. So I think probably we wouldn't be looking at doing another research and development trip until 2024, but I'm happy to discuss that with you later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
And I had another question. I'm just gonna ask it now. So I had a question about the advisory board that you mentioned about in, mobilizing them to help your organization grow, especially fundraiser wise. But I had a question about how do you balance the ideas that you get off them? Because when you start as an organization and you have an advisory board, of course, they're very excited to be a part of it, or even a board of directors, if you will. They're very excited to be a part of it. But eventually, as you go on working, obviously they come up with so many ideas that the team can implement. And as someone who would be leading the organization, you know the capacity of the team and you also know the scope of your work. Of course, you would want to do everything, but if you're known for something, or if you're focusing on your branding on something, it's difficult to take everything on your plate. So how would, if you have faced it as well, like how do you balance that and how do you gently reject the idea, if you will? Or how has that worked out for you?
There's some real tension there, right? Because these are people that you've invited and that you need, I mean, for money, for sometimes advice, but it's honestly, it's mostly for funding. Like these are people who it's like, okay, you're looking to make a social impact. We have a way for you to do that. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of tension with, there's nothing wrong with leading with what you need. So like we need funding. This is why we have a board, is for, obviously there's so many other, like you're saying, there are some ideas, there is some advice, there is some expertise that can come from that. But ultimately what an organization needs is money, is funding, is networking, is opportunities, is access. So I think it's really tough, but building that into your ask, I think, is important. So like when you're engaging someone, I mean, maybe not for the first time, but if you have someone in conversation who's like, I love the work that you do, this is speaking to me in so many ways. I'm so into it. Oh my God, it's so great. You're like, wonderful. Well, we're actually recruiting, members for our advisory board. And I would love for you to consider it. Like if you're interested in learning more, let's connect, let's keep talking. I'd love to see how this is a good fit for you. And then when that conversation happens, I mean, I think I would just say like, we're a small organization and we're starting here, and maybe in the future we're looking to grow in these areas that you're in, that you're suggesting, but we'd really love for you to participate in these ways because this is what we need. And again, just kind of telling your story to get them excited, like here's our impact. Like listen to what their background is. If they're saying like, oh, I've loved education since I was a child, and if they want to take it some, tangential direction, just focus on that core, like we have kids who are finally like, we're taking them from 8th grade to university, and, we have the spotlight on one of our students who's just made it, and she's so excited, and here's what she's doing, and here are her dreams, and you can be a part of this, and just kind of get them excited and focus on the impact of your organization and, just redirect. Yeah. I mean, it's like, if they say potato, you say carrot and just make that carrot exciting.
Thank you so much. That helps a lot.
Thank you so much for that question. Extremely helpful. And also the advice has been super helpful. I think people might reach out for some of the partnership conversation too. I think that's something that we'll keep an open channel to as well. I want to see if, I know we've passed the 30-minute mark, and I want to respect that energy and question that other folks have as well. So I want to open us up for a few questions from the group. Feel free to, just unmute, raise your hand, or if you want to put it on the chat, we'll, read it out loud as well. We're just going to give you a minute to think through a few questions and then jump right in.
I have more I can also say while folks are thinking about just kind of like the board engagement as a fundraising strategy. I mean, I only kind of spoke to like part of it. I think also kind of looking at what other strategic partnerships could exist for your organization is really important. So I mean, I have literally cold called on LinkedIn. I've reached out to people like, love the work that you do. I'm ignored half the time, but sometimes someone gets back to me and sometimes it actually gets somewhere. Or I fill out a form, I never hear back. I fill out another form, I actually do hear back. So you really never know what's going to work. So I know this is exhausting looking for fundraising, but I would just try it all. I would just if you have someone in your organization that can devote at least like 5 hours a week to just looking to see what funding resources exist at this time, I think that's helpful because I know I see like a lot of open calls, I see a lot. And so just creating that focused time to just, here's what's available right now. Then you prioritize them. I mean, obviously based on length, because I think that is, unfortunately still an issue in the development world is the applications are long, they're time consuming. Sometimes even for not a lot, like, there are organizations that I've been a part of that I've been working with for 2 years, and it's taken me quite some time to finally make some progress with them, funding wise. So it's definitely a marathon, and it's definitely not always all worth your time, but just having this kind of short list of like opportunities that you're following, maybe organizations that are releasing open calls. I think it's just you build those kinds of resources and you start to see more opportunities that way too.
Jenny, on that point, I did want to just piggyback and ask you about the most frustrating thing about a fundraising process for you.
Oh, oh man. Yeah, I mean, I want to say all of it sometimes, but that's not fully, yes, it's very difficult. Thank you, Mona. But no, I mean, I think just the amount of work it takes to get such a small amount of funding sometimes is just, it's a little defeating. It's like, okay, so all this work for this, that's okay. But just know that it is ultimately worth it, because what is worth it to me is knowing like maybe I can't do exactly what I wanted to do with these funds with our partners, but I can do some of it, and that's better than nothing. And what's critical is it just doesn't kill your enthusiasm during the fundraising, because I think having little support groups, having little like vent sessions, or giving yourself a break, whatever kind of self-care you need throughout this process, because it is highly frustrating unless you are, and we're a small organization too. So unless you are a middle to larger organization, fundraising is always going to be a challenge. And that's just kind of an ongoing like reality, unfortunately, unless, you win the lottery, which I hope for all of you, but I don't think that's very likely. So yeah, I mean, I think it really is just kind of building resilience inside, like for what's going to be kind of a difficult, a difficult task.
I wanted to just jump in and ask you if you, try to get in-kind donations and what you do with, how that can work as not only a value, right? And it's something,
Yeah.
then it's an asset. What do you do in that way?
Yeah. This is honestly when we're planning like a volunteer trip or a research and development trip, we always kind of ask our partners what kind of wish list you have. So what can we be bringing with us? As a quick example, we did a site visit to our Cambodia projects in January. So we asked them, what can we bring? Sometimes we bring as many as like 3 to 4 suitcases full of like toys, or just whatever, like school supplies, whatever people are asking for on their wish lists. I mean, sometimes it's like, I just want some really nice cheese, so we'll like try and find a way of like bringing some snacks for the community workers that we have in country. But yeah, we always ask. We ask whenever we're doing a trip. It gets a little tricky for us otherwise, because we're mostly doing like the projects abroad. So it's really only when we're traveling. Yeah.
I do want to ask a question from John that was related to partnership, and I think this might connect a little bit with the question that Mona was also asking. Is there a possibility of partnering with a youth-led organization that works with both young men and women?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of our work too. So we have a partner in Cambodia that focuses on education for both women, our girls and boys. And it's women led. It was founded by a Khmer woman, and it's a wonderful organization. And what we've discussed even recently with them and our other partner in Cambodia is the necessity of getting boys involved in some of our equity projects, and how it's just like, I mean, we see this in the US, it's everywhere. Like if men are not our allies, if men are not working with us, we can only go so far. And I mean, honestly, I don't think we can go far at all without that kind of support and that kind of engagement. So I think it's critical. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. I do want to ask a question that might connect also with this partnership, and I know that you might, have more conversations with folks later on. Oh wait, did anyone have a question? I think I heard a microphone. Okay, I'll just ask this one question because it connected with the partnership piece as well. For Wiko, when a partner does come to you asking for a partnership or connection, what draws your attention to them the most, or what's your kind of process of deciding whether this might be a good fit? Is it that initial visit, or is there something else that you're doing in your process that allows you to decide which partner to go with?
It's been different every time, and I wish Rebecca were here, because I feel like her answer would really, like, we could have such a more complete answer if she were here. Rebecca is my co-founder and, my teammate, and definitely my other brain to all of this work. But I mean, I think honestly, she and I have our list of questions. We have kind of like our visions. We have the vision conversation. We do all the boring stuff, reading all the reports and just learning about the organization to the best of our ability beforehand. So we're not wasting time. We're not wasting anyone's time. And then we just kind of see what kind of bigger project we can do. So often this will involve, traditionally it will involve, can we build this project with a group? Like, can we recruit? Because part of how we've done some of the crowdfunding has been recruiting volunteers to do their own little fundraising campaigns and then come back with us. And then as part of the, the project, we go and work on a leg of it in country together as a team. So it will usually need to involve some kind of element of infrastructure building or some kind of project that can be very hands-on in that way. But that's not always the case, or it hasn't been recently through COVID. I think we're looking to get back there. And then I will say it's always around a kind of like project that can build longevity. So it's something that we can support once in a kind of big way, and then we can plug in other ways in the future. So it's something that we can see as sustainable and long-term, and that can carry itself so that the partner can support. It's not something that we're kind of creating ourselves and then it just kind of like, it can't be managed because it's too much work for our partner. So I guess there's just a lot of criteria. But yeah, it definitely, we're looking for longevity.
Super helpful, longevity, and I guess the piece around like having some clarity in the vision of the work that you're doing. I think we talk a lot about that in our courses, especially when we're setting up our mission statement, trying to identify like where it is that you're trying to go is a key piece there as well.
Yeah.
Any questions from the community here? Give a second for people to maybe unmute and go ahead and ask questions.
It's an interesting point. I can talk to some of that too, about like the vision statement and the mission. Sorry if I interrupted any, just ask your question. I'll stop talking. But when thinking of doing that, I think that's so important when you're talking to people. I mean, I think one of the kind of early steps for fundraising for us was just talking about our work and why we love it. So really like try and disconnect from some of the frustrating parts of fundraising when you're going into fundraising, to connect with your work and your story and who you are and why it moves you. Because I think if you can do that in a way that's really like meaningful for you, it will shine through and you will just immediately be making those connections a little bit more completely. And that's honestly, I think, just key to the work is that human connection. So that's not something that I've mentioned, but with each of these conversations that I'm having, even if it's through a crowdfunding platform, I'm trying to create a kind of human connection with someone, with my audience, with my board member, with, with this giving collective that I've been talking with this organization that has funds for us, but we don't know when they're going to give, if they're going to give. It's just trying to create this human connection so that there's a relationship being built. And if they don't give this time, if they don't give this year, maybe they'll give next time or next year. So I think it's just kind of cultivating these relationships over time that can produce, but it takes work. Yeah.
I'd love to jump in and hear from, the folks that are here, what, in terms of, reaching out and fundraising and crowdfunders and emails and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff, if you could wave a magic wand, and say, oh, this is what I'd love to be able to happen in my community, in terms of, fundraising strategies, what would that be? Would it be to have more internet? Would it be to have, more visitors? What would be your magic wand that you'd love to implement in your communities so that funders noticed you? Anybody? I saw Mona, I saw you shaking your head, or Jimmy or Rogers or anybody. What would you do?
I just typed in, but I said I would have physical fundraisers where we can actually raise funds, because I think meeting people like lets us sell so much more than a website or even a virtual meeting, I think, because actually meeting and talking and showing like the difference is very, very vast. But I don't think it's very normalized to have fundraisers in Nepal. And even if we do, a lot of people don't really donate. I think it's also because of the community that we belong in, is that everybody is looking for donations. So it'd be unfair to expect that people would be able to donate to you. But I think if I could, that's one thing that I would do. Or have all international donors fly in and meet us.
Yeah, that sense of meeting a person in their community and seeing what they do and who they know and how they talk, and all of that is so lively and kind of hard sometimes to communicate in words in a letter. Yeah.
I don't know whether you can hear me. Sorry, I'm joining from the street, but maybe to come in. Actually, for me, securing first grant for organization is a challenge. And for my network, I would really love that trust, building that trust within the network. That can also open doors for referrals, because mostly securing grants, if you are not known, you are not trusted, it's a challenge. So within the network, building trust, letting people know the impact that you're creating and showing that impact for purposes of referrals and even donation. Thank you.
Yeah, standing out in a sea of asks, right? And a sea of good work. Yeah.
I think I might have seen another question from Asta.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Asta,
I
do you want to
probe?
come off mute and? Oh yeah, go for it.
Can I probe a little bit? What consortium is this? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sorry, I just typed it out because I had a lot of noise going on. But right, I had a question, when a small organization sometimes partner with other organizations, say as a technical partner in projects, and I was wondering if that's the same for smaller grassroots organizations. Have you had an experience partnering with another organization for a project, or are thinking of in the future? And, in terms of fundraising, what are the challenges if you've already faced them, or, the kind of challenges that might come up when you have a partner organization? Because I think sometimes it's kind of easier to work with other organizations that have the technical expertise and if you have the same kinds of values. So I was wondering in terms of that.
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding what you're asking correctly, and if I'm not, please interrupt and correct me. But I think what you're saying is if we had a project and then we had a partner who was also working towards this project that had some technical expertise, we could partner together and then fundraise together. What kind of challenges would that create? Okay, yeah, so I think we haven't done it exactly that way in the past. It is something that we're exploring currently, and I think it would just be really important to make sure your organization and what you're doing is aligned completely before kind of getting involved with that fundraising and getting an understanding of what exactly the fundraising is going to go to. I know it seems like pretty heavy, like financial focus, but I think those are the important things to take care of up front. So like having a kind of formal agreement. So like, I don't know if it's a percentage, if you're fundraising for the exact same project, that's kind of easy. But if it were something like an example, like maybe there was a slight, the funds are going to be going towards this, maybe they'll be going towards that. I don't know exactly what project this is. So I'm just going to guess, like, if you're coming at it from like a construction angle, like we need certain funds for this construction project, and your partner is like, okay, well, we have a kind of, this is our fee. This, just make sure that whatever percentage the total fundraising would be going to your side of the project, including your fees, including your salary, if that's going to be part of what you're working on. I think this is often the hardest thing to budget for in these projects is, like community leaders getting a salary, so this is something we always want to work into our projects. It's not commonly asked for, but I think it should be, and I think it should be commonly allotted into the budget for projects. So this technical expert should ask for a salary. You should ask for a salary. Everyone should be getting paid to do this work because, you have a family, you have a life, you need a salary. So I think it's just being very clear on the budgeting, and just being very clear on the roles and responsibilities going into the labor involved. So like the labor of fundraising, the distribution of funds, and then, just kind of like how that gets divided ultimately is pretty important. But I will say, I think that's like really important. I think it's key for groups like that to work together. And I think it's very doable. Like, I don't think it's something that organizations should shy away from. I think that's how movements can grow. That's how projects can grow. And that's how, perhaps more organizations can get funded. So I think that's a really great idea.
And I love your advice around like making sure that everyone's time is getting compensated in the process. I think that's something that we all tend to forget quite regularly, and there isn't a lot of encouragement sometimes in the fundraising process to pay your staff well, to pay yourselves well, and the idea of like thriving is not a common concept. Like, it's mostly just like survival. Like, if you're working in this space, like surviving is the most important piece, but then there's a whole kind of school of thought that's pushing for more thriving incomes for people doing this work as well. I appreciate you naming that there.
Yeah,
I think there was a question. Joseph, were you gonna chime in?
No, I was just gonna say that I had some experiences. We had some experiences working partnership also last year because in Haiti, a lot of these local organizations, a lot of them work by themselves. And that was one of the criticisms they had, like the 2010 earthquake. So last year we had volunteers sending out emails for partnerships. One of the things I noticed was if it was like an email to a large, more established or more well-funded organization, one of the things they always assumed or asked was they would assume that we're reaching out, trying to get their funding, trying to ask them for money. And what type of partnership do you mean? So that was when it was just more collaboration in terms of maybe they could assist in technical know-how, infrastructure, that type of stuff. And so that's just my personal experience. People sometimes anticipate that you're trying to ask them for funding as a small institution, that type of stuff. So, but yeah, partnerships is a great way of doing it in terms of impact, I think, and possibly being in terms of synergy. Like I said, there's a lot of competition type of mindset that exists in this area, a nonprofit area. People are competing for grants. So maybe that's some of the reasons why that assumption is always made. And, but that's my personal experience, though.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious if with the technical, so you reached out to an organization asking for technical support and they dismissed you because they assumed you were asking for funding?
No, we've reached out to many organizations. Some of them did responded, but they've always, but the perception is always, they always want to make sure what the nature of it is, and it's always about money. They think, we don't have
Yeah.
any, we don't have any money.
I
That's
see.
what we're looking for. But we've had many meetings, and
Yeah.
even, yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
I think there was a question that Rogers had, which is connected to what he was, I think, saying earlier about securing your first grant. So I'm curious about any advice you might have on securing that first grant, and if you have any case or an example that you could share of your first grant with WICO.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we do not qualify for grants. So I've done grant writing for other organizations that I can speak to some, but it's really hard to get your first grant. So I mean, I think just maybe cultivating that relationship as much as you can. I mean, researching the organization, trying to talk to a grant officer that works there just to make sure you're getting everything aligned. I mean, I've been working recently to get a grant for one of our projects that may or may not happen, but it's been a 2-year process of just trying to like understand the bureaucracy behind like the paperwork, behind like how to have an attractive application. If I would say if you can see like previous grantees and you feel comfortable, maybe you even know someone who works there, I would ask to see their grant application. I mean, I would be really just direct and just say, hey, we're looking to get funding from this organization, from this funding partner. I would love to see if you are willing to share. I just want to know like how this works. Or you can reach out to the funding organization. Sometimes maybe they'll black out the names or the amounts and just show you. But I think this is something that should be way more transparent than, in my opinion, it is, because it can be such a process that is so confusing, even for people who have studied this, who have been in this space. It's highly bureaucratic and confusing. So I would try and go around first, go explore all the angles surrounding the actual grant application, the actual submitting of it. Again, I know that's a ton of work and you can't do this with every grant application, but if this is your first and you recognize that this is a grant that's really aligned with your vision and your purpose, I would just see what other access points there are. Someone at the organization that you can talk to, a previous grantee that you can talk to and get some resources from, maybe even their grant application, and then ultimately just kind of getting everything organized beforehand. And maybe I think they should be, but maybe they would even be willing to like review it and give you some feedback before you submit it. But that's the kind of thing I think should exist with grant application, not necessarily what does.
Love that. It reminds of this advice around like asking for feedback and potentially getting funds rather than asking for funds, and usually generally just getting feedback. So
and I will say this might actually be a really great, if you are currently doing this, that could be a great entry point to finding someone on LinkedIn or trying to connect with someone on an advisory board kind of level. Like, hey, we're new to this grant. We have this application. I was wondering if you could look over it. If you have any like people who have done this before, I'd love to talk to them. So that could be kind of an easier entry point to forming a board member that could later then be, not asked for money or used for like fundraising campaign purposes. So try and think of how you can talk to people besides just asking for money.
And I wanted to just jump in and say too, that because you're part of this Little Big Believers network, I just want to remind you that you can send something to Avi and I and ask us if we have time to look over it as well, because we know that you're trying and writing, and you can ask one another. We're big supporters of using your own expertise as peers in this cohort. Share something with one another and say, what do you think? Is this communicating? Share it with your team. Sometimes if you've written something and I think, oh, this is exactly what I'm doing, and then I send it to my colleague and they're like, what? That's not what we're doing. So really work with others who are trying to get money in the same way, and see if you can support one another in how to, and just building off of what Jenny was saying, to how can I revise this? Editing is mostly revision. I mean, writing is mostly revision. Grant writing is mostly, oh, got to do it again. Oh, got to do it again versus having some innovative idea. Yeah.
I do
Yeah,
see
that's
a
great.
hand up, but we only have about a minute, unfortunately. But Jimmy, I would appreciate if you would email your question. I think Jenny would be open to sharing her thoughts eventually with you all as well. There are a few other resources that Jenny has mentioned during this meeting that I will be circling back to you all along with the video of this session. So we really appreciate all of the insights that you've shared with us, Jenny. It's been so helpful, from talking about launching a crowdfunding campaign to actually recruiting donors to building some of this relationship. I think some really practical tips that I know folks can use in a very short term. So appreciate the succinct and like helpful advice that you've and wisdom that you've really shared with
I
our
hope
community.
so.
Yes, and I guess in terms of next steps, if you're looking to do be a partner or learn more about WeCo, remember the relationship building advice. I think it's really an opportunity to build that relationship now with Jenny and her team. So I hope you will take some time to learn more about WeCo and stay in touch with Jenny. And I will circle back with an email to share all of that contact info as well. And Jenny, to you, thank you so much for making the time and speaking with us today. Such a pleasure to have you here, and such a joy to always learn from you. So thank you for making the time, and look forward to having you back with us again soon.
It was very enjoyable, and I loved all the questions and just hearing about your organizations. So please do keep in touch, and just good luck. I know it's a lot of work, but it's a beautiful world and a beautiful work. So just well done to all of you.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you all again in about a month's time for the next convening. Until then, have a lovely June ahead. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.